Clarence Thomas said it is hard for him to go out in the public now. He was like without basically somebody bothering him.
Who, by his own admission, and there should be no shame in this, by the way, got into Yale Law School because of affirmative action. He apparently is ashamed of it, so much so that once he became a jurist on the courts, he decided his first and foremost obligation, apparently, was to help usher out the very programs that had opened the door for him.
Thomas should have never been a Supreme Court justice. Had we listened to this black woman, he would have been in the back of a police car and not on the bench of the Supreme Court.
Clarence Thomas said it is hard for him to go out in the public now. He was like without basically somebody bothering him. May his Boston baked bean, big back, bastard ass never have peace. Because, sir, after you have basically closed the door on every ladder that has gotten you to where you are, may your ass never go out and have peace, my good bitch. Okay? Because you aspire to be something that you will never be. And baby, I wish that back then y'all would have listened to us, because I remember telling my aunts and uncles and things, believe Anita Hill. If they would have believed a black woman, baby, we would have never been here. We would have never been here. Because I swear to God, the way that man has kicked down anything that is helpful to black people, all because he hates himself, is wild and crazy. And then thinks he deserves peace as he has been caught doing the things that he has been doing financially, sitting on people's yachts and whatnot. And baby, they don't love you. They don't like you. They just like the fact that you have helped them dismantle the things that they feel black people do not deserve to have. On stolen land, no less. And you thought that telling folks that you can't go out in the public eye and whatnot, and it's just hard for you, was going to make somebody feel sympathy? My good bitch. America's not a real place, and when you watch the fact that this man has literally dismantled democracy by chipping it away piece by piece, and then wants peace, that this man has absolutely decided that he will not step down. He will more than likely go on to glory, still holding that seat. But he wants peace. May you nor that raisin of a wife never see peace. Ever. No grocery shopping, none of that shit. No. Convenience stores, nothing.
Clarence Thomas, being only one of 2 black justices, the only black man on the court, votes to dismantle the voting rights of his own community? The same community that worked for decades to uplift black voters and black voices in our government votes to then go undermine all of that work. That's despicable. But this issue just really blows my mind. The cognitive dissonance he can have sitting on the highest court of the land, never has to worry about getting elected, makes a decision that makes it so much more difficult for black voices to be amplified in our government. Shame on you, Clarence Thomas.
Now let me explain this type of black person and Republican, because everyone probably has one in their life. And if you look at any pictures of Clarence, he's always with his Anglo persuasion. He just has pretty much ousted out his black life. But when you have totally disowned a people, number one, they're not very accepting. If Clarence Thomas would have walked into a black church, I don't know what happened. I really don't know what would happen. I don't know what would happen, because we all know what he's done. He wouldn't be welcome. I mean, black people, though, are very welcomable. We don't forget. We've welcomed in some of our enemies to the worst places. are the best places. We reach out to people. That's just who we are. Let's stay on the outrage kick. Here's a lady that's outraged by the whole voting rights thing, and I'm glad the noise is out there.
If Clarence Thomas isn't an Uncle Tom, then why did he shut the door that he used himself to get to his position for millions of black people across this country? Because by revoking the 1965 Voter Rights Act, he has done exactly that. He has basically burnt the same bridges that he used to get to his successful point for everybody else that's in the same position that he was once in. So my question still remains. Is Clarence Thomas considered an Uncle Tom? But what I do know right now is that he is more voting for his class than his culture, because his class is that of the 1%. He believes that he is a part of an elite group rather than remembering the culture that brought him up. Now, I can't speak to that culture, but I can respect it, and I still can't imagine that someone of that culture would then burn the bridges that helped him get to where he wanted to go for millions of black people across this country. How is that possible, and why isn't there a battle cry asking for his resignation for what he's done to his own people?
You can look it up.
Here's a guy who, by his own admission, and there should be no shame in this, by the way, got into Yale Law School because of affirmative action. He apparently is ashamed of it, so much so that once he became a jurist on the courts, he decided his first and foremost obligation, apparently, was to help usher out the very programs that had opened the door for him. I'm not sure how to think about that except to believe that that is someone who does not have a problem with the system of white supremacy that marginalizes other black folks, as long as he got his. And he got his, and then he got out and basically said, that's it, we're done with that. I think if you look at his rulings, and particularly if you contrast his behavior as a judge and as a justice with the man he replaced on the court, Thurgood Marshall, it's very interesting to see that one of the greatest jurists in American history when it comes to civil rights and when it comes to human rights and progressivism was replaced by one of the most reactionary justices, because George H.W. Bush knew that you had to replace the black justice with another black justice. He didn't want to replace him, however, with the black justice that had a connection to the movement, that had a connection to the struggle. So he found one that had no connection to the struggle, and if anything, was ready to spit on the struggle. You look at what Clarence Thomas has said in these voting rights cases. He is perfectly prepared, apparently, to uproot the Voting Rights Act of 1965 because he thinks, as do many of his white colleagues, that we can trust the states that have a history of racism to just do everything right, which of course is absurd. The only reason they've been doing things right lately is because there's a law in place that forces them to do things right. And as Justice Ginsburg said, to say that you can get rid of that law just because it's working right now is like saying that I don't need my umbrella when it's raining because I'm not getting wet. Now, you're not getting wet because you got an umbrella. That's why.
Clarence Thomas says he can't step outside in peace anymore. But a lot of black people are saying, hold on, let's talk about why people are upset in the first place. Because this conversation didn't start yesterday. It goes back years to voting rights, affirmative action, and decisions many black Americans believe made life harder for their communities. So the real question is this an unfair backlash or is this accountability? Let's break this down. So one Supreme Court case in particular changed everything, and by the end of this video you'll understand why Clarence Thomas remains one of the most controversial figures in the black America.
If Clarence Thomas has 0 haters, that means I've been run over and killed by a PT Cruiser. Because Clarence Thomas should have never been a Supreme Court justice. Had we listened to this black woman, he would have been in the back of a police car and not on the bench of the Supreme Court. In 1991, Thurgood Marshall retires from the Supreme Court. Big Bush says, hey, we need a black and a Republican to replace him. Who does he pick? Clarence Thomas. The Senate Judiciary Committee sent a subpoena to a black woman in Oklahoma named Anita Hill. But why? Well, in 1981, Clarence Thomas is working for the Department of Education. In 1982, Ronald Reagan gives him a job to chair the EEOC. In all 3 of these years, he had a black woman named Anita Hill working up under him. And in all 3 of these years, he sexually harassed this woman. Anita says that for 3 years, Clarence begged her to go on a date with him, would bring up his manhood in the workplace, would talk about his pubes and things of that nature, would talk about explicit films, all in the workplace during the 9 to 5. Anita came in to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee to tell her story. The only problem is the people she was testifying before were 14 white men, and they weren't trying to hear anything she had to say. Frankly, a lot of their line of questioning was disrespectful.
Committee, what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged? You testified this morning that the most embarrassing question involved, that's not too bad, women's large breasts. That's a word. Are you interested in writing a book? It is appropriate to ask Professor Hill anything any member wishes to ask her to plumb the depths of her credibility. You are not now drawing a conclusion that Judge Thomas sexually harassed you.
Yes, I am drawing that conclusion. That's
I
fine.
understand.
Anita tells her story in excruciating detail. Clarence responds and calls this nothing but a high-tech lynching. And that was it. Clarence Thomas still becomes a Supreme Court justice. Anita Hill goes back to her life as a professor at Oklahoma State. She receives death threats, and nobody believes her. Clarence Thomas wouldn't speak about this, wouldn't even really deny the allegations until he spoke about it in his 2007 book, My Grandfather's Son, where he called Anita Hill his most traitorous adversary and said that she was mentally ill. Anita Hill is still alive, still a lawyer, still a professor of law, and I hope wherever she is, that she had a great day today.
Because what you mean, Clarence Thomas here, the ultra-conservative, black, white supremacist Supreme Court justice, voted against affirmative action and the Civil Rights Act while benefiting from both. Now, why is that important? Because now that he's helped dismantle the Civil Rights Act, Trump has said he's now retroactively going after those who hold degrees gained by affirmative action. So, two things to that. One, that case now has to go in front of the Supreme Court, in front of Clarence. So if he agrees to this, he is stripping himself of both his degree and his position on the bench. So I just can't wait to see how this plays out.
72 years ago today, the Supreme Court handed down the decision that is the foundation of every right that black Americans fought for and won in the civil rights movement. But one black man who owes everything to that movement has spent his entire career trying to undo it. That man is Clarence Thomas. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court ended racial discrimination in public schools in the case of Brown versus Board of Education. But it would take another decade to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and a year after that, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That movement made Clarence Thomas possible, and Justice Thurgood Marshall must be turning in his grave to see his successor destroy it. The Brown case is what allowed Thomas to become the first black student at an all-white high school in Georgia. Another case, Loving versus Virginia, would allow him to divorce his black wife and marry a white woman. And a third case, Sweat v. Painter, guaranteed black students a seat at the table of legal education, setting the stage for Thomas to attend Yale Law School. The civil rights movement gave Clarence Thomas every opportunity in his life. Even his current job as a Supreme Court justice came because of affirmative action. And how did he repay that debt? By spending decades on the court dismantling the very laws and policies that made his life possible. Just in the past few weeks, he voted to allow two southern states, Louisiana and Alabama, to take away majority black congressional districts. All skin folk ain't kinfolk. Clarence Thomas is 77 years old, spent almost half his life, 35 years, longer than any of his colleagues, ruining our lives as a Supreme Court justice. He's the poster boy for why we need term limits on the Supreme Court. And he's one more reason why we can't sit out on any election, because the people elected are the people who select and approve the judges with lifetime tenure. How sad that on this solemn anniversary, one of the greatest threats we face is from a bitter black man who forgot where he came from.
So first, let's be clear. Clarence Thomas is a historic figure, the second black justice to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. But being historic does not mean universally supported. In fact, many black Americans strongly disagree with his legal positions. One of the biggest reasons is voting rights. So in 2013, Supreme Court in Shelby County v. Holder, this decision weakened a major part of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The law had protected voters, especially in states with histories of racial discrimination. Before certain states changed voting rules, they had to get federal approval. After the ruling, the protection was largely removed. Critics argued that this opened the door for stricter voting rules, and many activists said those laws disproportionately affected black voters. Clarence Thomas actually believed that the court should go even further. That's one reason some people see him as working against protection that historically helped black communities. And that's only the beginning. Then came the affirmative action. Clarence Thomas has been one of its strongest critics. He has argued that the race-conscious admissions can be harmful, but many Black Americans see affirmative action differently. They view it as one tool, imperfect, yes, but one that helped address generations of unequal access. So when the court moved against affirmative action in college admissions, guess whose fingerprint people believed were all over that? Clarence Thomas. And for many viewers, that reinforced a pattern. So let's talk about why this triggers emotions. And because this isn't just politics for many people, it is personal. Voting rights affect representation, education decisions affect opportunity, and court rulings affect everyday life. And so when someone in power makes decisions people believe hurt their community, emotions get real. That doesn't mean every criticism is fair, but it explains why reactions can be so strong. So let's be fair. Supporters of Clarence Thomas say he is simply interpreting the Constitution based on his judicial philosophy. They argue he isn't there to make emotional decisions. They say judges are supposed to follow legal principles, not popularity. And whether you agree with it or not, that is an important part of this conversation. So guys, let me ask you, is Clarence Thomas being unfairly targeted? Or are people responding to decisions they believe changed their lives? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below and kindly remember to keep it respectful. And one thing is undeniable. Clarence Thomas remains one of the most talked about and controversial figures in American public life, and conversations like these are not going away anytime soon. If you want more breakdowns like this, kindly hit the subscribe button and join our family. Like this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.